eyes may be able to see, but without a heart, you cannot feel.
What's up, everybody? This is Socialist, and you are tuning into episode 87 of the It Will Come show. And today we're going to be talking about socialist versus capitalist communities as explained via a system known as wealth dynamics. So let's dive straight in. First of all, why did this topic come about for today? Well, recently, and again, if you're tuning in for the first time, this show is sponsored by Fire Corp, so at FAIA Corp. And with a lot of our business dealings and communications with the online world, because FAIA is involved in the blockchain space, which is connected to crypto, which is connected to a lot of very opinionated people on Twitter, platforms like Twitter. I personally see a lot of conversations take place in heated debates around capitalism and socialism / communism, right? And it actually kind of frustrates me that so many people are focused on being right and trying to convince others that their way is right, that they fail to try and see where other people are coming from. And so in today's episode, I'm kind of highlighting the differences between proponents of capitalism and proponents of socialism, right, from a community perspective, right? This is just community sentiment. And the reason for that is so that you can see just how we also look at things from FAIA when it comes to communities, right? Identifying sort of how people have their sense of belonging, how the group, the herd, the masses also seek to validate their own internal beliefs. And that when you actually, when you see people make statements or look for attention, they're really looking for facts and figures to support what they believe, right? Because there's also a lot of sharing of facts, right, online, where it's very fascinating because the same facts can be interpreted differently from either side. And so, let's dive in. So here we have capitalism and socialism, right? As you can see on the left side, capitalism is an economic system where the means of production are owned by private individuals, right? So there's a lot of focus on individualism, generally when it comes to capitalism. Companies live by the profit motive. They exist to make money. All companies have owners and managers. It is the government's job by enforcing laws and regulations to make sure there is a level playing field for privately run companies. All right. Then on the right, you have socialism, right, which often gets interchanged with communism. Communism being sort of like the extreme version of socialism. The means of production, such as money and other forms of capital, are owned by the state or public, the people. Under a socialist system, everyone works for wealth that is in turn distributed to everyone. The government decides how wealth is distributed among the people. They provide for the people. Another word that you might hear alongside socialism is collectivism, right? And so with collectivism, it is about the collective. So if you look at capitalism being very individualistic, so you can see sort of the manifestation of individualism through an economic function, then you've got socialism being sort of the economic manifestation of collectivism, all right? And so you have this tension of people who believe that it's all about the individual and others who believe that it should be about others and the collective. Now, over time, just as sort of background, I have part Polynesian descent, and so you'd probably argue that a lot of Polynesians are collectivist or more socialist leaning, if you want to look at it that way. It really is about other people, family, and generally, how whoever earns what, it gets distributed out to everybody relatively equally, right? If you look at Samoan culture, sort of the chiefdoms and how everything is centralized, right, and divvied up that way. So I have that sort of cultural context where it is more collectivist. But since I was brought up in the West, I've definitely learned more about capitalism, the power of individualism, and I see the merits in that as well. So just looking at the two of them, hopefully you see sort of where I'm coming from in terms of this wealth dynamic system that I'll be sharing. All right. So just to look again from the capitalism versus socialism side, this is just a list of sort of what the motives are, the enterprises. As you can see, ownership, private versus public. Motive, profit versus social welfare. Freedom of choice, consumer sovereignty. And actually there was a a video recently in Singapore about a sovereign lady. It's actually kind of funny. Sovereign lady Singapore. Yeah, so there was a woman who was charged in Singapore for essentially flouting, the law rules around wearing a mask or not. And she said she called herself, "No, I am not an individual. I am we the people." Right? And I think for a lot of people who consider themselves sovereign, it's interesting. And Nikki PV says the world needs an SD card slot. I don't know if that comment is from today or previous episode, but yeah. So sovereign woman charged with breaking COVID-19 rules. All right. So if we go back here, enterprises, individuals versus government, class, two classes equals, and then classless society. Right. So the socialists will want to have no classes because usually people who support socialism aren't in the upper echelons of society. Right. When they say we the people, they're talking about the more poor, the downtrodden, those who are at the bad end, right? The poor end. Not always, but generally, like you'll see these socialist tendencies when there's just the distribution of power, right? Where there's just too large a gap between classes. And of course, capitalism usually benefits, and you'll hear sort of a support for capitalism from those who have been more fortunate. Not always, but generally. Concentration power, capitalists, central authorities, so on and so forth. All right? So now let me introduce the wealth dynamic square. So this wealth dynamic square is actually introduced by, oh my gosh, forgot to share the screen again. So I was actually looking here, guys, sorry. And then now we're going into this. So this is the wealth dynamic square. The wealth dynamic square is a system created by a guy named Roger James Hamilton. Roger James Hamilton is an entrepreneur. He invented the wealth dynamics to essentially provide like a personality profiling system for entrepreneurs. In terms of personality profiles, you might be familiar with Myers-Briggs. So if you ever heard of what's your MBTI, right? ENFJ, ESFP, ENTP, ISFJ, so on and so forth. This particular system kind of takes or amalgamates a few different profiling systems. Everything from the Myers-Briggs to even the I Ching, which is another Chinese divination system. And what I love about this system is that it uses nature, right? Nature principles as part of its way of profiling. So here, the way that I usually explain this system is in the form of seasons, right? So you can see at the top we have Dynamo, Wood, Spring. On the right you have Blaze, Fire, Summer. Down below, Tempo is Earth, Autumn. Over here on the left you have Steel, Metal, Winter. Okay, and using these four sort of seasons, you can apply them to people and then even further entrepreneurs. So for entrepreneurs, you'll generally find yourself with a lot more strength in one of these areas, and you might still have a little piece in the other quadrants. And so at the top, the way I explain the spring people, they are, if we were to use animals even, I'd call them like the eagle clan, right? These guys have their head in the clouds. They are generally all about ideas. Their language is about the power of ideas. They will generally speak to people from a vision standpoint, and they'll be very, very strong in painting that, right? So their pathway for entrepreneurship or creating a business should be based around innovation, ideas, right? So that's the dynamo type. Then on the side here you have Blaze, and that's the summer people. The summer people, if they were an animal, I would call them the wolf clan. The reason why wolf clan is because they're all about people, right? So whereas in the dynamos at the top, you have them being about ideas, those on the right are more about the people, all right? So you're going to be their languaging is going to be all about storytelling in relation to people. It's going to be very focused on that side of things from a business perspective. So if you were a summer person, you'd probably focus on a business that had to do with magnifying things versus multiplying, right? So this is the difference in terms of language, right? You would often hear people in the startup world talking about scale, right? And that scale is actually coming from the winter side. So at the top, dynamo, if they were leaning, mechanic, or creator, and those are the names of the profiles, they would often talk about scale. Whereas the guys over here, on the blaze side, if they lean towards that strategy of scale might not actually work great for them. They're actually going to be looking at magnifying. And so this is why you'll find blaze people are usually in like media, entertainment, HR, consulting, right? Anything that is very people heavy and people oriented, you'll usually find them on this side. Communities. And then if we go down, we've got the earth autumn folks, right? So these ones are all about, as you can see, sensory timing. So they're going to be a lot more grounded people. Their type of business is actually going to be focused on having their ear to the ground. So while the dynamo people at the top is all about having their head in the sky, the earth autumn folks need to actually have businesses that involve being available to people a lot, right? So they would have a business that involves being on the ground, stuff that requires sort of day-to-day insights. So that's why they show trader. And anything generally, they are also about people, but from a more grounded standpoint, right? Then you got the winter people on the left. These ones are notorious or most well known for actually being the ones who earn the most money. The reason for that is because they can be cold, hard, and calculated. The things that work great for money because it takes emotion out of the picture. So a lot of your investors you will find over on this side, they'll probably be the owner of basketball teams. They will be the owner of commodity-based businesses, steals, resources, the things that people might find boring, but actually because they get to multiply that, they'll take something very simple and make it either complicated or multiply it. That's where they make the most amount of money, right? And these guys actually do help create systems and make things efficient that help serve the masses way better than some of the other quadrants. Now, that's not to say that everybody who is in the winter side on the left is actually someone who is going to earn lots of money. It just means that they have the potential to, right, because of just this. So a lot of bankers, right, you'll find that they usually are on the steel side. Accounting as a profession, steel side, right? Spreadsheets, steel side. Anything to do with people, you're going to be on the other side. Right? And you'll also find a lot of your introverts on this left side. Not always, but you will find them there generally. And of course, as you can see, there's extrovert under magnify. You will usually find them there. Intuitive on the top, sensory down below. All right, so just for some context as well, so you can see what type of people are associated with each of the profiles. So there are 9 profiles, for each of the 4 seasons. And at the top, you've got creator profile in the form of Richard Branson. On the right, you've got star, Oprah Winfrey. Here you've got Jack Welch, who was one of the best general managers for GE. Really great leader. I think he was called Manager of the Century. Helped turn things around. So the supporter profiles are actually really good at turning ideas into action. And I'll talk more about like how they all need to work with one another actually. Then you've got the deal maker, who's Donald Trump, right? So interesting factoid, he actually was well known for always being available on the phone for anybody. And as a deal maker, right, you can hear him talk about like him making deals with all these other countries. And that's actually his strength. But where he actually falls is when he tries to be a star. And to be honest, you can see when he actually tried to be, he tried to create that media business, The Apprentice, right? He tried to turn himself into a star. That's actually a recipe for disaster. During that time, he lost a lot of money. But now, actually, as a deal maker, he's gone back into a star as president. It's kind of interesting to see how that is playing out. So, a lot of people will probably fall in line with these personality profiles without even realizing it, but they exist, and understanding this can actually be very useful in understanding where people are coming from. Then down here, you have a trader profile. Now, this trader doesn't mean that you have to be a trader. It's just sort of a name that they give in the profile. But other people you would see here is your Mahatma Gandhis, your Mother Teresa's. They would actually fall under this sort of profile. Accumulator. So this is Warren Buffett. So accumulator profiles are very good at accumulating, right? They don't really need to create anything like Richard Branson. Their wealth comes in by timing stuff properly and then multiplying that. So investments. Stocks. And then you've got here, I think, forgot the name of this guy, but he's the owner of a large steel company. And yeah, lowered profile, exactly like that name. Essentially, they're the ones who can sit in the background and count and multiply stuff like it's no one's business. Then you got the mechanic profile, which is Mark Zuckerberg. These guys are really good at improving things. They probably procrastinate the most in improving stuff because they're just perfectionists that way. So if you look at the story of Facebook as well, the creator profile, actually those were probably the Winklevoss twins, the ones who actually came up with the idea for Facebook. And then Mark Zuckerberg actually took the idea and improved upon it to turn it into what it is today, Facebook. So both are kind of needed, right? But most people just aren't aware of this to know how to manage themselves when they're coordinating. Okay, so now how does this all apply to socialism and capitalism, right? So if we take a look here at this profile again, and maybe we'll use this one, where I would put, and it's interesting, right? So if you're up for it, right? Where on this square would you put capitalists versus socialists, right? Feel free to put it into the comments. But where I kind of put the two of them is that I would actually put the socialists on the right side under the blaze or the summer side, and then I would put the capitalists over here under this steel side, the winter side. And the reason for that is that you look at the languaging, right? You'll see, if we go here, do you see where it says ownership, private versus public, right? You could literally just kind of exchange this with introvert and extrovert. Introvert, private, extrovert, public, right? And so on this side, you would have the capitalists, talking about how the individual matters more, right? And then the people-based summer folks, right? People on this side, because they're all about the people, they're going to say, no, it's about the collective. It's about everybody else. Both are correct in my view, right? But because they're both fighting for convincing the other side to see things the way that they see it, you get this conflict, right? But the reason why I'm sharing this square is because how this square works is that they all need to work off of each other, or they all need to learn how to work with each other. And so let me put up, just so you can see actually when you do this test and sort of like the lines that are drawn. Okay, here's an example. So let's open this one. Oh, and this is Roger James Hamilton, the creator of wealth dynamics. So this is just an example of when you do the test, right? This is the profile you get. Now, it'd be so fascinating, right, if we got the whole world to take this test, because then it would actually map out where we are, where we're leaning, right? And so here you can see there's, when you do the test, you get sort of node points in different areas. So this particular person has a creator leaning, but he has a bit of mechanic, has a bit of star, very little supporter, deal maker, accumulator, etc. Okay, so using this, right, you would see essentially in the world, right, where we as a collective actually lie, where we lean towards. The United States, right, probably looked at this, probably be very capitalist leaning, but actually in terms of its foundations, but actually now I think it's probably shifted more to the other side, right? Just because we've seen a rise in populism, we've seen a rise in socialism, and even just people picking up Karl Marx readings, right, to learn more about it. And the reason for that is because I think we've gone too far on the other side, right, the Lord side. We go here, the capitalists, and they are the ones who hold a lot of the power and the money. And so they're pushing things towards this side, but not realizing it causes an imbalance in the entire whole. And so whenever you have something spring towards one side, right, so for example, if it's too far here, the opposite, it sort of brings back to the opposite side, right, to equalize. And nature always does this thing of equalizing. And so you have a lot of capitalists right now who are, losing power, right, or they're seeing how stuff is moving more to the summer side, and they're wanting to keep things here. But if you understand seasonal cycles, everything just keeps going in cycles constantly, right? And if you look throughout history, you'll see how there's a push towards socialism, and if it goes too far towards socialism, it'll go to some other form or system of governance, right? And I think that's what we're seeing in the world right now. It went too far to the capitalist side, and so now people are looking for holes in that and trying to push it towards the other side. And they're saying that capitalism doesn't work, but it did work, right? it did work, but the problem was when you have a system that tries to hold power for too long and doesn't understand how seasonal cycles work, that things just shift naturally, then they try to hold on to that longer than they need to, without having the wisdom to understand that things just shift and to move with that. And as these systems shift, as the governance types shift, and even economic systems, it will have different leaders. And so, yeah, that's essentially how I see, socialism versus communism, in terms of like the communities and why you see that tension. So right now, you have people on this side talking about it's all about the collective, others, talking about the individual. And to be honest, I just see them both as like two sides of the same coin. Some people will say it doesn't work, in different times, and it's true. Like these systems will not work in different times if you're not paying attention to the seasons. And to be honest, I see this as a result of us kind of disconnecting ourselves from nature, forgetting that things happen in cycles, in seasons, and we just don't look at that anymore. So I've shared here because actually I'm technically a supporter profile. So if we're looking back at this, I'm on this side, so I'm all about the people. But because I've been raised in a Western country, I've learned the power of this, and I've also been in a relationship with people who are on this side. So I've tried to learn and walk in their shoes to understand how they see the world. It's not right or wrong. It just is. I just see them as different sides. And so, this is the supporter wealth profile. And I'm sharing this because this is actually taken from love languages. And the reason why, if you've never heard of the 5 love languages and you are in a relationship or looking to get into one, I would highly recommend you learn what the love languages are, because it does actually relate to this, and even to socialist versus capitalist, and understanding just how and why they speak the way that they do. Because at the end of the day, people who are like, voicing their opinions are really just looking to be heard, right? Wanting to feel understood. Because that's how communities get formed, right? You find people of a like mind who understand where you're coming from, and then you form a community. And everybody's doing this. But if you really want to be able to transcend your own biases and to be able to step into other people's shoes, learn some of these basics. With the love languages, this is to do with the 5, right? So words of affirmation, physical touch, receiving gifts, quality time, acts of service. What does this mean? It means that when it comes to communicating yourself, people will actually, even though we all speak English, for example, for some of us it's our first language, and some of us aren't even that great at it. But others, this is like the next level of communication. You have words of affirmation. So people who express their love or want to receive love, send and receive love will be through words. So for these type of folks, an example would be like, they would say I love you to somebody else and actually mean it. And then they would expect in return to be told that, they are loved as well, in order for them to feel that love. But what usually happens is if you have somebody who has a love language primary of words of affirmation with, say, acts of service. So one person will be like, I love you to the acts of service person. And then the acts of service person will be like, instead of saying I love you, they'll go and wash the dishes, because that's an act of service, and that's their form of telling this person that, hey, I love you, and that's why I wash the dishes. But unfortunately, because this person's communication language is words of affirmation, they might not receive that, right? So it doesn't matter how often this acts of service person does, the dishes or cleans up. Unfortunately, this words of affirmation person, if they're unaware, will never feel that love, right? And it's the same thing if you look at these people, right? Looking at the capitalist versus the socialist. These people are constantly talking about how it's about the people, but that's not the language of these folks on the left, the capitalists, because they're all about the introversion, the individual, etc. So they don't want to hear it, right? And the same thing is with the socialists on this side. And if you just look at the news right now and look at politics, everybody's just screaming over the top of their lungs at each other and all screaming to be heard. And then, so on and so forth, physical touch, receiving gifts, quality time, acts of service. Those are all forms of communication that go beyond just the spoken language. All right. And with that, so that is actually the end of today's session. I hope you kind of got a better idea of sort of the differences in languaging and how the cultures are and the communities are when it comes to capitalism and socialism. I highly recommend you really take a look at this system, wealth dynamics. If you're an entrepreneur, even if you're not, I think they have other forms of the system like talent dynamics if you work in a team. But this allows you to just start looking at the strengths and weaknesses of one another. Because again, with this, it is all about working together, understanding that we all sit in these 4 different seasons and that you can work together. If you remember, where is that image? Here, right? So if a team did this, they would get this sort of map, and then you'd be able to see where you're strong in, but you need to look at where you weaken. And the idea would be to balance that out. That would be the most ideal, harmonious scenario. So even when it comes to our economic systems right now, our forms of governance, I am of the opinion that we actually need to balance it out and not just go with one form of system over another. You know, it's not just about democracy, or it's not just about capitalism, and it's not just about socialism, right? It's like, what would actually get us the most harmonious? And it's never completely equal, right? But see where we're weak at, see where we can balance out, and find that together. But first, we need some self-awareness. Where are we? Yeah. So those two, capitalism versus socialism. Would love to hear your thoughts, on sort of the fight and the tension between socialists and capitalists. Feel free to write it down below in the comments section. And also, if you are here for the first time, remember to hit that subscribe button, like, share, do the thing. And finally, I thought I'd share this. There is an event taking place this Wednesday. It's the 101 of community building with the guys at Sky Talker. I'll be chatting about sort of things that I've learned about communities in general, and sharing that with the wider ecosystem. And with that, as always, remember, through patience and persistence, it will come.
The eyes may be able to see, but without a heart, you cannot.